There we go. Now you are. I believe.
Okay.
I mean, that's what you do. So.
So now we're going to watch what we're saying.
All right. There you go. That's perfect.
Or maybe not, because it's coming only through the computer. Coming only through the other sound. I turned one of them.
No, I just heard you say it.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
Right, there's a delay.
Yeah. There.
See those? Now it's coming. It's coming through. Yeah.
As long as it's soft.
Hello, testing 1, 2, 3. Broadcasting from Clearwater, Florida. This is Orchadash. You're not hearing the music? Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah, I heard you. Okay, we're going to sing. Why would you do that? With joy. Chloe, if you're Spanish. Sing with Chloe. Okay. And the first one is, you put laughter into my soul, so good to hear you laugh.
I once was dead, my spirit cold. I had no joy, far from the fold. Messiah came, he made me sing. Oh, he put laughter into my soul. Oh, come, let's sing, let us rejoice. Oh, come, let's sing, let us rejoice. Messiah's come, and he brought joy. Oh, he's brought laughter into my soul. Long ago they promised he'd bring us light. Long ago they promised he'd bring us light. And light to lighten for wandering feet. But he brought laughter into my soul. Oh, come, let's sing, let us rejoice. Oh, come, let's sing, let us rejoice. Messiah's come, and he brought joy. Oh, he's brought laughter into my soul. It would have been enough had he brought light. It would have been enough had he brought peace. It would have been enough Messiah's come, and he brought joy. Oh, he's brought laughter into my soul. Oh, come, let's sing, let us rejoice. Oh, come, let's sing, let us rejoice. Messiah's come, and he brought joy. Oh, he's brought laughter into my soul. Let me see if I can get away with a modulation at the end there. We'll check it out on the tape later. See how that works. Melech Hoser. Melech Hosea, Mashiach Umagen. Melech Hosea, Mashiach Umagen. Baruch atah Adonai, Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Abraham. Baruch atah Adonai, Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Abraham. King, Redeemer, Savior, and Shield. King, Redeemer, Savior, and Shield. Blessed art thou, blessed art thou, Shield of Abraham. Blessed art thou, Shield of Abraham. You are the mighty one forever, O Lord. You are the mighty one forever, O Lord. 'Cause you raise the dead, sleeping in their grave. You are mighty to save. You raise the dead, sleeping in their grave. You are mighty to save. Melech Hosea, Mashiach Umagen. Melech Hosea, Mashiach Umagen. Baruch atah Adonai, Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Abraham. Baruch atah Adonai, Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Abraham. Yes. Another Shabbat, another day closer to summer. For me, retirement. I'm a little happy. I'm a little giddy, a little light in the stepping forward here. Lord, he has made me glad. I will call on the Lord. Wait, I got the wrong song. I don't have the words up for that one.
Well, that's not the one you have up. We're on a different one.
I will enter his gates with thanksgiving in my heart. I will enter his courts with praise. I will say this is the day that the Lord has made. I will rejoice for he has made me glad. I will rejoice for he has made me glad. He has made me glad. He has made me glad. I will rejoice for he has made me glad. He has made me glad. He has made me glad. I will rejoice for he has made me glad. I will rejoice for he has made me glad. Why? Because this is the day. This is the day that the Lord has made. That the Lord has made. I will rejoice. I will rejoice and be glad in it. And be glad in it. This is the day that the Lord has made. I will rejoice and be glad in it. This is the day. This is the day that the Lord has made. So I will enter his gates with thanksgiving in my heart. I will enter his courts with praise. I will say this is the day that the Lord has made. I will rejoice for he has made me glad. I will rejoice for he has made me glad. All right. Having some fun. As the mountains are around Jerusalem, the Lord is all around his people. As the mountains are Jerusalem, we shall not be moved, we shall not be moved. Like Mount Zion in the midst of Jerusalem, we shall not be moved, we shall not be moved. From this time forth and forevermore, the Lord is all around his people. From this time forth and it shall always be, the Lord is all around his people. A minor 6 for those of you writing. It's not in the book. They just, always done it. I don't know. Sounds neat. Hallelujah, 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 sing hallelujah. He will save his chosen peoples and defend Israel, for he will redeem his people. Sing hallelujah. Unto Abraham's land he will draw them, as a shepherd gathers his sheep. He will bring them back into Israel. Sing hallelujah. Hallelujah. Hallelujah, 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 sing hallelujah. Shabbat shalom. Thank you all for coming.
I guess that's me.
We're ready.
All right. Actually, it's a minimum number of colored pieces of paper this week. We have this Saturday at 1 p.m., that would be tomorrow. And then next week, the following Saturday, we have some seminars for preparing and planning for Passover. By the way, on April 19th, that is the first night of Passover, and we will not be meeting here. That is to allow everyone an opportunity to celebrate a Seder in their home. And So don't forget that. And then if you want some help in preparing what that might look like, that's coming on tomorrow and the next day.
What if people should show up?
I don't know. All right.
We're going to give them directions to your house.
Put a sign on the door, you're right.
So we had the Hebrew blast off, and then this Sunday, March 31st, is the follow-up, and we have April 14th, and all the dates are there. So if you are a Hebrew student, you can see that you'll be studying Hebrew on these Sundays coming up. Havdalah and Game Night is at the end of April, all the way to April 27th. Other than that, we have some financial information for you to take note of in the bulletin, and that's about it. So it's a good week, it's a good time to be here. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Also, make sure you take note on the back table, information from the Florida Holocaust Museum. There's a number of things that they are offering by way of exhibitions, upcoming events, including some movies. So this is always a good opportunity to connect with the rest of the Jewish community and connect with some very good things. So don't miss out on that either. Okay. Having said that, we're now ready to begin. And I will ask that you turn to pages 144 to 145 for Matovu. Matovu is a reminder of the privilege that we have of being here, and it should also be a reminder of the awesomeness and therefore our response of awe that we have of entering into the presence of God. Matovu, when it was originally uttered, was uttered by the wandering and strange prophet Balaam as he encountered the reality of God in the middle of Israel, in the wilderness. So, God, in a sense, in the middle of us, or more appropriately, we are in his presence, as Matovu reminds us. Pages 144 and 145, Jacob leads and then we respond.
Adonai ahavti ma'on beitecha umkom mishkan kavodecha va'ani eshtecha be'ekra'a evracha lifnei Adonai osi va'ani tefilati lecha Adonai et ratzon Elohim barov chazdecha aneni be'emet yishecha
How goodly are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel. O Lord, through your abounding faithful love, I come into your house, and reverently I worship you, and I in your holy sanctuary. I love being in your house, the place where your glory resides. Here I bow down to worship you, my Lord and Maker. Accept my prayer, O Lord, and answer with your great mercy and with your saving truth. Amen.
How lovely are your tabernacles, O Lord of hosts. I long, yes, I pine for the courts of the Lord. My heart joyfully sings to the living God. One thing have I asked of the Lord, that I will pursue, that I may live in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the graciousness of the Lord, and to enter his sanctuary. Teach me your way, O Lord, and lead me in the right path. With you is the fountain of life, and your light do we see the light. Lead me in the right path, O Lord, we have asked. And we come to that with the reality, or understanding the reality that he is the fountain of life, and in his light do we see light. And light becomes a significant image for us as we light the Shabbat lights yet again this evening, because it reminds us that Shabbat stands as the perpetual, the permanent guarantee of our relationship with our God, his commitment to us to be our God and to have us as his people forever.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu lahidlik ner shel Shabbat. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who has set us apart by your commandments and commanded us to light the candles for the Sabbath. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu lahiyot ologoyim, v'natan lanu Yeshu Meshikeinu ha'or la'olam. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who sanctified us by your commandments and commanded us to be a light for the nations, and gave us Yeshua our Messiah, the light of the world. Shabbat shalom.
The reality that Matovu introduced us to, we continue in, pick up on, and in fact, as we turn to our Tehillah Hebri Kadashah portion this evening, pages 1536 and 1537 in the Pew Bibles, the book of Revelation, chapter 4, verses 2 to 11. And as is our custom, I will lead you through the parts that are not indented. You get the parts that are indented and are in quotation marks as well, as we in effect find ourselves in the presence of the God of the universe, sitting as it were in the throne room of the King of all kings. But now hopefully you found pages 1536 and 1537. If you're not familiar with the Bible, it's at the very, very end. All right, and the text begins, Uk'rega hayiti baruach v'hinei kitzei nira v'shamayim ve'achad yoshev al ha'kitzei. Being translated, I was there in heaven. Before me stood a throne, and on the throne someone was sitting. The one sitting there gleamed like diamonds and rubies, and a rainbow shining like an emerald encircled the throne. Surrounding the throne were 24 other thrones, and on those thrones sat 24 elders. From the throne came forth lightnings, voices, and thunderings, and before the throne were 7 flaming torches. In front of the throne was a sea of glass that was as clear as crystal. In the center around the throne were 4 living beings. Verse 8, each of the 4 living beings had 6 wings, and day and night they never stopped saying, Holy, holy, holy is Adonai, God of heaven's armies, one who was, who is, and who is coming. Let me interrupt for just a second. You translate that last phrase, Afikomen. I only mentioned that because something else is coming quickly, and that's Pesach, and that is a central part of Pesach. So now we continue in that throne room scene as it describes that scene further and says, and whenever the living beings give glory, honor, and thanks to the one sitting on the throne, to the one who lives forever and ever, then the 24 elders fall down before the one sitting on the throne, the one who lives forever and ever, and they worship him. They throw their crowns in front of the throne as they say,
You are worthy, Adonai Elohim, to have glory, honor, and power, because you created all things. Yes, because of your will, they were created and came into being.
If you were to read into the next chapter or two in this same book of Revelation, you would find that there is someone else that's part of this throne room scene. It's the one who is pictured on the throne in Elohim Asher, pages 40 to 41. And he is the one who, in fact, is the guarantor of all that God has promised us. Pages 40 and 41 is that response as we continue, as I said, in that throne room scene.
Elohim asher diber mikadem me'amim rabot u'mirachim rabot el avot beyad hanevi'im diber aleinu be'acharit hayamim ha'eleh beyad ha'bein asher san le'yoresho u'vyado gamasa et ha'olamim u'zohar kevodo v'tzelem matzuto v'noseh kol bidvaro Rahanavura ulachar shte'asa tihur chatayim yashav le'emini adullah. In the past, God spoke to our fathers through the prophets and many times in various ways. But now, in the end of the days, he has spoken to us by the Messiah, his Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things, and through whom he made the universe. The Son is the full radiance of God's glory, and the flawless manifestation of his reality. He sustains all things by his powerful word. After he made atonement for sins, he sat down in the place of authority, beside the majesty in heaven, true and firm, established and lasting, right and faithful, loved and treasured, desired and pleasant, feared and mighty, ordered and acceptable, good and beautiful is this word to us forever and ever.
Sephardi Kaddish, pages 156 and 157, reminds us of the greatness and the graciousness of our God, the one who is sitting on the throne. But it also reminds us that the one who is sitting on the adjoining throne is the one who will come. And we expect that coming, as these words guide us into that expectation, as well as in the expression of our gratitude for the graciousness of our great God. Pages 156 and 157 is that response. Once again, Jacob leads, and then we respond.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה והמה דברך ירוחי וימליך מלכותי ויצמח פורקני ויקרב משיחי וחי יכון עוד יום יכון וחי דרכו בית ישראל הגלה ובזמן קריב יאמרו אמן. יהי שמירה ומבורך, לעולם ולעולמי יתברך. יהי שמירה ומבורך, לעולם ולעולמי יתברך. וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל. שמי וקודשה בריחו. לעיל מנחו ברכתה, ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה. לאמירן בעמה ויאמרו אמן. יהי שלום הרבה משמיא, וחיים טובים עלינו, ויעקו ישראל ויאמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו, ויעקו ישראל ויאמרו amen. Glorified and sanctified be his great name in the world which is created according to his will. May he bring about the reign of his kingdom and cause his salvation to sprout, and bring near his Messiah in your lifetime and in your days, and in the life of all the house of Israel, speedily, yes, soon, and say, Amen.
May his great name be blessed forever and forever, eternally. Blessed and praised, glorified and exalted, extolled and honored, adored and lauded be the name of the Holy One. Blessed be he, who is high above, far above all blessings and hymns, praises and consolations which are spoken in the world, and say, Amen.
May there be great peace from heaven and good life for us and for all Israel, and say, Amen. He who makes peace in the heavenly realms, may he make peace for us and for all Israel, and say, Amen.
Truly he is high above, far above all blessings, hymns, praises, and consolations which are spoken in the world, including those spoken by us. And that's been our response, which then reminds us to ask that question, therefore, who is like you, O Lord, among the gods? Pages 44 and 45 is where we turn to next, as we continue to praise the one who is truly above our praises. As the text says there, we praise our exalted God. We say, blessed is he who is to be blessed. Moses and the people of Israel sang this song to you with great joy. And with the same great joy as they all said, we now all say, who is like you, O Lord among the gods? Who is like you, glorious in holiness, awesome in praises, doing wonders?
Mi kamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi kamocha nehedar b'kodesh, nora tehilot osef eleh. Mi kamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi kamocha nehedar b'kodesh, nora tehilot osef eleh.
As we now rise in his presence, we answer the question that we asked, and we answer it by saying, truly, there is none like you, O Lord, among the gods. Pages 88 and 89 is that response.
Ein kamocha va'elohim Adonai, v'en kamasecha, malchutcha malchut kol olamim, u'memshaltcha b'chol dor v'dor, b'chol dor v'dor. Adonai melech, Adonai malach, Adonai imlok leolam vaed. Adonai oz le'amor yitain, Adonai yivarech et amo
few among the gods, my Lord, and there is nothing that compares to your deeds. Your kingdom is a kingdom that endures for all eternity, and your sovereignty extends throughout all generations. The Lord reigns, the Lord has reigned, the Lord shall reign throughout eternity. The Lord will bless his people with peace.
And now we make that response a little more personal, not just that your sovereignty extends or should reign throughout all generations, but it needs to reign in each and every one of our lives. That is our acknowledgement, that is our affirmation. Now, as we turn to pages 34 to 39 and respond with the Shema, saying, Lord, you are my God, the only one whom I will serve, but I will serve you wholeheartedly and faithfully. Facing Jerusalem, the direction of the ark, we respond on pages 34 to 39.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem Elon Malkuto Le'olam Va'ed. Ve'ata et Adonai בכל דרכך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אלוקים מצווך היום על לבביך, לשיננתם לבניך, ודיברת בם, לשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך, ובשכבך ובנך, ובשרתם באותה ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך, ובשעריך.
Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone.
Blessed be he whose glorious kingdom is eternal.
Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your life, and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as reminders on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the doorframes of your houses and on your gates.
As we stand before the great King, we continue to respond to him, and we make our requests known to him. The Amidah portions this evening are the abridged section at the top of pages 60 and 61, and we move to paragraph 5, pages 74 to 77. As the text begins, translation is direct our hearts to your worship, but technically, ol et livavenu means circumcise our hearts, so that we can more completely encounter you and more fully follow you. And then we think as we move to the next paragraph in terms of not only being in his presence, but we look forward to the time when his presence will be throughout the world, when he restores his presence to Zion. So use those words to shape your response. First the abridged section, then paragraph 5. And so may we see the lengthening of the light of your Messiah. In the meantime, may you be pleased with your people Israel and with their prayer as we await the time when we behold your return to Zion with mercy. Baruch atah Adonai, Hamakazir, Shekinato Yitzil. Blessed are you, O Lord, who returns your presence in Zion. Vayhi ben So, pages 88 and 89, anticipates that time as well of his return, of the return of his actual presence to Jerusalem. It's also the time when, as was predicted by the prophets, from Zion will go forth the Torah, and the word of the Lord out of Jerusalem. We have these distinct privilege of experiencing that in a small way, as from here goes forth the Torah, and among us goes the word of the Lord. Pages 88 and 89.
ויהי בן צהרון, ויאמר משה, קום אדוני ויפוצו אויביך, וינוסו בשדיך מפניך. כי מציון תצא תורה, כי מציון תצא תורה, ולדבר אדוני בירושלים. ברוך שנתן תורה תורה, ברוך שנתן תורה תורה, לעמו ישראל בקדושתו. And it came to pass, whenever the ark went forward, Moses would say, Arise, O Lord, and let your enemies be scattered. May those who hate you flee from before you. For from Zion shall go forth the Torah, and the word of the Lord out of Jerusalem. Blessed be he who in holiness gave the Torah to his people Israel.
He gave us the Torah. We respond to the gift with our commitment to follow him in it fully. That response is found on page 133.
The ark now unveils its treasure.
To our eyes and minds and hearts.
Inside the scroll of Torah stands.
It stands there with all its richness and wisdom.
As we listen, voices speak, voices of our ancestors.
Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Joseph, and Moses.
O God, they bring your instructions for us.
Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, and Miriam speak to us as well.
O God, they move us to respond to your promises to us.
We are grateful for your words, the words of Torah.
Hear, O Israel, the Lord calls.
We will hear your words that we may learn them, love them, live them.
What does the Lord require of you? To fear him, love him, serve him, and walk in all his ways.
All the Lord has said, we will do.
Baruch hu et Adonai Hamvorah. מלך העולם, אשר בחר בנו מכל העמים, ונתן לנו את תורתו. ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
Amen.
Bless the Lord who is blessed.
Bless the Lord who is blessed forever and ever.
Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who chose us from all peoples and gave to us his Torah. Blessed are you, O Lord, giver of the Torah.
ויהי ביום השמיני קרא משה לאהרון ולבניו ולזקני ישראל ויאמר אל אהרון קח לך עגל בן בקר להטה ואיל לעולה תמימים והקרב לפני אדוני. You may be seated. And so it happened or occurred on the 8th day, Moses called or spoke to Aaron and his sons and the elders of Israel. And he said to Aaron, take for yourself, interesting phrasing, it carries with it somewhat of the idea you will benefit from this as well, a bull, ben bakar, best translated a young bull, for a sin offering, and a goat for an elevation offering, which is also called a burnt offering. This should be a perfect or blemish-free or flawless a goat. And you are to bring this before the Lord. And again, that term, as we've described it before, to bring, has to do with drawing near, coming into the presence of God. Aaron is given the instructions for how that's to take place. He got to experience that, as did the people of Israel, and then further instructions are found here as well. I might add that on this particular Shabbat, it's called Shabbat Parah, and it's called that because we also add another reading from the book of Numbers, which we won't do tonight, but it has to do with that mysterious red heifer and its amazing ashes. But the point of it all is, as we're beginning to get closer to Passover, we're reminded that we need to come into his presence having been cleansed. The red heifer ceremony is a ceremony of cleansing. And then to how should I put it, emphasize the reality behind that cleansing, the rabbis of old chose a Haftarah passage on this for this particular Shabbat. It's the one that will be read in your presence. It's the one we looked at or referenced a couple weeks ago. It's the idea that the ultimate cleansing comes when God says, I will cleanse you, and I will place my spirit within you. I will give you a new heart. Technically, the phrase is a renewed heart. But it reminds us of the ultimate reality from which cleansing derives. So, that's the set of readings for this evening. That's enough said for right now. And it's now time to do the blessing, and then we will move directly from that into the Zohar Torah.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech olam, asher natan lanu Torah emet, v'chayei olam neta b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai, noten haTorah.
Amen.
Blessed are you, O Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who gave us the Torah of truth and life everlasting, planted in our midst. Blessed are you, O Lord, giver of the Torah.
He is truly the one who has given to us the Torah. We're reminded of that virtually every time we read from it. And so we acknowledge that, and we acknowledge it as our ancestors did, as they stood before him to acknowledge that these are the words of God. We too stand before him now, and we acknowledge that these are the words that God gave us directly through the hand of Moses to us as his people. The Zohar Torah, pages 98 and 99, if you need the transliteration, page 95. That just reminded me, before you do that, since you're standing, that's appropriate, you will read together with me the text. I almost forgot to make you do that. You have the text written before you in the inside of the bulletin. So follow along now, these words, before we acknowledge them. Ready? Here it goes. Vayehi bayom hashmini kara Moshe la'aharon ulvanav ulziknei Yisrael. Vayomer el Aharon kach lecha egel ben bakar lachatat ve'ayil le'olah temamin ve'hakrev lifnei Adonai. Well read, and so well received. Now we acknowledge what it is that we have received. The Zohar Torah.
וזאת התורה אשר שם משה לפני בני ישראל על פי אדוני ביד משה.
It is in accord with the Lord's command by the hand of Moses.
You may be seated. And Jacob, you're right, they didn't wait for you, they knew the text, they went right on ahead, we had primed them for the Hebrew. Before the reading, however, it's a Haftorah reading, so we need to do the Haftorah blessings, so you can turn to pages 94 to 97 for the blessings as we anticipate the reading.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar בנביאים טובים ורצה בדבריהם הנאמרים באמת. ברוך אתה אדוני הבוחר בתורה ובמשה עבדו ובישראל עמו ובנביאי האמת והצדק.
Amen.
Blessed are you, O Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who selected good prophets, delighting in their words which are spoken truthfully. Blessed are you, O Lord, who chose the Torah, your servant Moses, your people Israel, and the prophets of truth and righteousness.
I'll be reading from Ezekiel 36, 24 through 28. And 33 through 36. For I will take you from among the nations, gather you from the countries, and return you to your own soil. Then I will sprinkle clean water on you, and you will be clean. I will cleanse you from your uncleanliness and from all your idols. I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit inside you. I will take the stony heart out of your flesh and give you a heart of flesh. I will put my spirit inside you and cause you to live by my laws, respect my rulings, and obey them. You will live in the land I gave to your ancestors, and you will be my people, and I will be your God. Adonai Elohim says, when the day comes for me to cleanse you from all your guilt, I will cause the cities to be inhabited and the ruins to be rebuilt. The land that was desolate will be tilled, whereas formerly it lay desolate for all passing by to see. Then they will say, the land that used to be desolate has become like Gan Eden. and the cities formerly ruined, abandoned, and wasted have been fortified and are inhabited. Then the nations around you that remain will know that I, Adonai, have rebuilt the ruins and replanted what was abandoned. I, Adonai, have spoken, and I will do it. I'm reading from Ephesians 6. Oh, are you supposed to go ahead?
Yeah.
Please.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Tzur kol ha'alumim tzadik b'chol hadorot ha'el ha'ne'aman ha'yomer v'yosei hamdeberon ka'ayim shekol davarav emet v'tzedek ne'eman atahu Adonai Eloheinu ונאמנים דבריך, ודבר אחד מדבריך, אך לא ישוב ריקם כי אל מלך, נאמן ורחמן אתה, ברוך אתה אדוני, האל הנאמן בכל דבריו. Amen. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, ruler of the universe, rock of all ages, righteous throughout all generations. You are the faithful God, promising, then performing, for speaking, then fulfilling. For all your words are true and righteous. Faithful are you, O Lord our God, and faithful are your words, for no word of yours shall remain unfulfilled. You are faithful and merciful God and King. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, who are faithful in fulfilling your words. Have mercy on Zion. It is the fountain of our life, and very soon deliver her who grieves deeply. Blessed are you, O Lord, who makes Zion rejoice with her children.
And her children now respond.
Make us joyful, O Lord our God, with the prophet Elijah your servant, and with the kingdom of the house of David your anointed. May Elijah come soon and bring joy to our hearts. Allow no stranger to sit on David's throne or inherit his glory. For by your holy name you swore to him that his light would not be quenched forever. Blessed are you, O Lord, the shield of David.
Baruch atah Adonai Magen David.
I'm reading from Ephesians 6. Children, obey your parents because you belong to the Lord, for this is the right thing to do. Honor your father and mother is the first commandment with a promise attached to it, namely, that things will go well for you and you will live a long life in the land. And parents, don't make your children needlessly angry. Instead, gently bring them up with the guidance and instruction that comes from the Lord. Servants, wholeheartedly obey your human masters with a deep respect and reverence, as though you were serving Messiah. Don't serve this way only when they're watching you just to gain their approval. Serve as servants of Messiah, doing what God wants you to do with all your heart. Do your work cheerfully, as if for the Lord and not for people. Remember, the Lord will reward each person for the good that they do, whether that person is slave or free. And masters, treat your slaves in the same way. Stop using threats because you know that you and your slaves belong to the same master in heaven, and he treats everyone alike.
When we follow God's words, they impact our lives, and we're reminded of the impact that they can have as we respond with Etz Chaim, a tree of life. And then we make the request, renew our days as of old. So make that your request as we respond with Etz Chaim, pages 96 and 97.
Eitz Chaim Lemachazikim Ba V'Tonei HaMeushar Terafeha Darkei Noam V'Kol Nativoteha Shalom Hashivenu Adonai Elecha V'Nashuva Kadesh Yameinu Kadesh Yameinu Le'edem Hashivenu Adonai Elecha V'Nashuva Kadesh Yameinu Kadesh Yameinu Le'edem. The tree of life it is to those who take hold of it, and happy are those who support it. Its ways are ways of pleasantness, and all its paths are peace. Turn us, Lord, to you, and let us return. Renew our days as of old.
Renew our days as of old. That makes us better equipped to stand as his priests before him and respond in gratitude and in commitment and in love, as we now do. And we join on pages 98 and 99. Uvnucho Yomar.
Uvnocho Yomar, Shuva, Adonai Revavot Alfei Yisrael. When the ark rested, Moses would say, Return, O Lord, to the myriads of Israel's families. Arise, O Lord, to your resting place, you and your mighty ark. Clothe your priests with righteousness. May those who have experienced your faithful love shout for joy. For the sake of your servant David, don't delay the return of your Messiah. I give you good instruction. Do not forsake my Torah.
And now, as we get to greet one another up front, you get to greet one another down there. But please do not make a complete circuit of the synagogue while you're doing the greeting. That comes later.
Of the synagogue.
Well, this is amazing. Most of you sat down without me making you sit down.
Or getting better.
Well, if you hadn't noticed already, we're in the middle of March Madness. So we're swooping through the Sweet 16. We're entering the Elite 8. Did you like the way I sort of alliterated all of that? And it reminds us of the typical American drive. We're number one, or we ought to be, whether it's number one in the rankings, or in position, or in authority, or in power, or in greatness. But let me suggest to you, as we've been looking through Ephesians 5 and 6, let me suggest to you that's not so with the biblical ideal or God's ideal. His ideal is expressed for us in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 21, and then what precedes and what follows it. And it says very simply there, submit yourselves one to another. Interestingly enough, please remember, as we looked at it a couple weeks ago, that particular characteristic derives from the Spirit of God filling our lives in a very special way. It's the evidence of Him filling our lives. And then right after that, as we saw a while back, comes the instructions related to one of the important relationships that we often enter into, and that's marriage. And therefore, this particular principle becomes the enabler for that marriage relationship. Mutual submission, I would remind you, has to do with adjusting to one another and accommodating each other, even though they step on our toes and drive us crazy or out of our minds or all three of the above. But it says to do so in love, which is what gives us the motivation that enables us to do and respond in just that way. However, the principle of mutual submission carries over into other relationships as well. Other relationships as well? Yes, other relationships as well. And this should not be a surprise to us, because mutual submission is in fact central to Spirit-filled living. And in fact, in these relationships, it is its practical application. You see it in the outline that's provided for you in the insert. Two parts to this practical application for tonight. One has to do with familial relationships, and just to make things tongue-tied and confusing, one has to do with familiar relationships. We begin with the first. It has to do with families. The opening 4 verses, you have a translation provided for you in your bulletin. Mutual submission. Is that still the same principle here when we're dealing with this particular section of instructions? Well, you need to understand that the way in which it's structured, Ephesians 5:21, shapes Ephesians, not only Ephesians 5:22, but all of the rest of the text that follow on it all the way through to the end of the text for tonight, chapter 6, verse 9. That means this text tonight is making the same point. Don't misuse power or position. It includes the same parties in the general sense. In other words, it has to do with both sides in the relationship are addressed, not just one. And so in the case of families, we have first of all the desired response of the children, verses 1 to 3. And as you can see it from the outset, or if you remember it from it being read to you, it asks the children to obey their parents. You see, there's a reason for this, and it's spelled out in other texts. That disobedience is one characteristic of the depraved person, according to the same rabbi, as he writes in Romans chapter 1, verses 28 and 30, describing the depraved person or mind, and a good chunk of it has to do with disobedience. Disobedience, by the way, he tells us elsewhere, is a characteristic of the evil of the last days as well. 2 Timothy chapter 3. He talks about there will be terrible times in the last days, and disobedience is one of the things that is a characteristic of that. In contrast, however, obedience is what is expected. But notice that it is described in our text as obedience in the Lord, or as our translation has it, because you belong to the Lord. Now again, this harks back in some sense to Ephesians chapter 5:21, is mutual submission is a sign of the fact that the Spirit of God is working in our lives. Mutual submission then is also a sign of the fact that we are reflecting Yeshua clearly. That's what it means, do so because you belong to the Lord. The rabbis describe this kind of behavior as Kiddush Hashem, that you live in such a way that people will look at the way in which you're acting, that they hear what you're saying, and the faces that you are making at them, or whatever else, or not making at them, and they will say, wow, this person serves a great God. I want to find out all about it. That's Kiddush Hashem. We live in such a way that God gets credit. That's part of living or responding in this way because you belong to the Lord. It should become our motivation. It should become our resources. It should become our focus. And that's interesting, because when we think in terms of focus, that reminds us that we have decisions we can make. In other words, I almost used a bad term here, we can look at the situations we're in, the circumstances we face, and they are not really that encouraging or positive. May in fact be somewhat negative. But if we focus in this fashion, then we can look beyond that and see the God whom we are here to serve and before whom we are to respond. Anyhow, our motivation, our resources, and our focus. Verse 2 goes on to say, honor your parents. Now, by the way, I want you to notice something that's fairly clear here, and I know that by Friday night you've turned off the grammatical switch in your minds. So I'm going to turn it back on for just a second. This is an imperative. That means what you've got here is a command. Not an option, but an expectation. But you also need to notice, as was clearly read to you and as you see in the text, that this is not just a command, it is in fact a promise. Now I want you to notice another thing, and that is, by the way, that honor is one step beyond obey. Honor is what indicates respect. Honor is what responds in such a way that you elevate, that you speak and think highly of, not look down on someone. Now, from time to time, Patrice and I have reflected on this reality, and I'm sure many of you have experienced or are experiencing, and that is sometime in their teen years, kids come to the conclusion that their parents aren't so smart and maybe not so socially adept or aware. And as we have discovered, and I can say this freely because Eve and John are not here tonight, they've got kids' obligations elsewhere. And often it's not until they're in their 20s or even into their 30s that they realize suddenly their parents have become smart. But the idea here is to elevate, to speak and think highly of, not look down on. Now, here's an important thing to note. This is very important to note. Demanding does not produce this kind of response. Demonstrating does. In other words, modeling the same kind of behavior. Well, enough about that. Next, he talks about the responsibility of the parents, and I would suggest, and I do say this somewhat selfishly, by extension, the grandparents as well. The responsibility, first of all, has a negative component. The negative component, depending on your translation, is expressed this way. Don't exasperate your children. Don't provoke them to anger. In other words, don't exercise the authority flippantly or arbitrarily, say it slower, or do it with an iron fist or in a way which is inconsistent and therefore disheartens or discourages or frustrates or irritates the children. In a somewhat related letter, I'm going to do this anyhow. We talked about this last night in class. Beginning around this time, and certainly developing far more greatly later, there were Jewish communities scattered around the world, and they would often encounter situations that they had some questions about. And they would want a rabbi to give them an answer. How do we apply Torah to this situation we now encounter, to what we are now experiencing in front of us face to face? So they inquire of him, and the rabbi would send a letter. And these letters became known as part of the responsa literature of our Jewish heritage. The letter would be called a responsum. Now, if you haven't figured that out already, that comes from another language, but that's okay. This particular letter we've been looking at is part of this rabbi's responsa literature. He has another related letter or responsum, Colossians chapter 3, which bears on this particular principle. He says there, don't embitter your children. Don't embitter your children. Okay, that's the negative part, so let's move on from that. On the positive side, he tells them, bring them up in a way which honors God. Bring them up in a way which honors God. Some translations have it, in the training and instruction of the Lord. Our translation puts it this way, with the guidance and instruction that comes from God himself. Look, we already know this. You repeated it earlier tonight, didn't you? the next several lines of the Shema. After love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your life, with all your strength, what does he say? These commandments are to be on your hearts. That's good. But then impress them on your children when you lie down and when you get up, when you walk out of the house and come back to the house, and so forth. That's what's being referenced here. And what is implied here, or what is involved here, is active guidance and instruction. The alternate Bible that's on the end of your pews puts it this way: rather, bringing them up with the loving discipline the Lord himself approves, with suggestions and godly advice. Very nicely phrased to give us this idea. By the way, it builds on a text that's found in Proverbs chapter 22, verse 6. Train up a child in the way he or she should go, and when they are old, they won't depart from it. And most people get that all screwed up. And therefore, the children end up all screwed up. It doesn't mean bend them to your will. It means notice the way in which they're growing and assist that growth with shaping them that direction. That's quite the opposite, isn't it? But that's also what's in mind here. That's what he's building on as a good rabbi, drawing on those texts. All right. Familiar relationships are another practical application. And in this particular case, he's talking about those days' business relationships, or one part of it. Now look, I can read this fairly carefully, and just like you can, technically this is talking about slavery. At which point some might be prompted to say, now that sounds just like my job situation. So I better pay some attention here. But the principles here do apply to employee-employer relationships, as well as all kinds of other relationships. For example, committees, teams, just informal groups or whatever. And so he begins to spell out the two parts to the principle here. He says, slaves, serve sincerely. Slaves, you are to serve sincerely, verses 5 to 8. And verses 5 and 6, he begins by saying, servants wholeheartedly obey your human masters. There is that term obey again, but notice what he adds, with deep respect and reverence. In other words, respect, not disdain, disparagement, or negatively. Some translations then go on to describe it as serving with sincerity of heart. Or we have it here, wholeheartedly. Not hypocritically, not mockingly. And then in verse 6, he brings into heart again, doing all that the Lord wants, all that God wants with all your heart. Not superficially, enthusiastically. And then the text goes on to remind us, do this not just while they are watching, so as to score points with them, but remembering that you serve Yeshua, who, by the way, sees what's going on at all times. Then in verse 7, he says serve, or as we have in our translations, do your work. And that, I like that translation because it's makes it a little broader as we read it. Do your work. One translation has it wholeheartedly, in other words, energetically, not halfway. In other words, pull out all the stops. Another translation has it with goodwill, and all of that works in this case. In other words, with a positive attitude, or what our translation summarizes for us, do it cheerfully. Yeah, even if it doesn't feel that good or feel right, or pick a kind of circumstance you may have tumbled into or someone has brought in on you. Nevertheless, you do it cheerfully. That's a choice. And then he says, here's a motivator for that. Do it as to the Lord. In other words, as if you were doing it for the Lord and not to your master. And then he gives us this reminder. He says, remember, he's the one who ultimately pays or rewards you. So as you think about this, there's no room here for careless attitudes, for sloppy work, for half-hearted performance. But this is the kind of approach, if you take it, if you choose to take it, that heightens or elevates your obligations. And then he tells the masters, verse 9, manage mercifully. Masters, you are to manage mercifully. And I love the way in which he begins. He says, treat them in the same way. What? Treat them in the same way as the slaves are supposed to treat you. In other words, catch the same spirit. Oh, well, what's the same spirit? Well, look at the previous verses. Respect, sincerity, from the heart, cheerfully, with goodwill. Treat them as you would treat the Lord. And then he says, don't threaten. So ruling with an iron fist is out. But by the way, inherent within this phrasing is belittling is also out. And then he says, remember, under God, or in his eyes, they are your equal. And you have the same master. And if they are your equal, then you treat them in that fashion. And if they have the same master as you do, friends, that's a great leveler or equalizer, let me suggest. And then he goes on to say, because you'll have to stand beside your slave as if they were your brother or sister when you see God. Because they are. And by the way, the rabbi builds on this, enlarges on this somewhat in another one of his response writings, and that is when he writes to Philemon. I won't ask you to try to find Philemon because he's all of about 2 pages long. But he elaborates on it. Now remember, he says, when God judges, he doesn't care if you were a master or a slave, an employer or an employee. He doesn't care if you were a committee chair or a gopher. He doesn't care if you were the top dog or simply underdog. So there are some important biblical principles of management and relationship that are found here. In other words, mutual submission needs to be the rule. We elevate and encourage others, whether we work with them or they work under us. We don't demean them. We don't put them down. Instead, what we do is we motivate respect for their supervisors, whether that supervisor is us or not. And we do so by our behavior and by our serving attitude. That's mutual submission. Oh, and please, 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 as I've mentioned from time to time in the past, do note this. You don't judge others by this standard. You examine yourself to see if you fulfill the standards found here. And that's important. Look, we're involved in all sorts of relationships, and being human, relationships often go sour. People get in our way, they frustrate us, they cause us not only pain, but who knows, but stress and agony, who knows what else. And being human, relationships often go sour. They have the tendency to break down. They have a tendency to run into problems. When they do, we don't function at full potential. And the situations drain our energy and they drain our joy. So God has given us some important guidelines here for our relationships with each other so that we can enjoy his best and enjoy others better. Rav Shaul explains the vital central principle and then applies it to several important areas for us in these texts: marriage, family, business. But it can apply even more broadly than that, as I suggested before. He reminds us, don't abuse your power. Don't abuse your position or misuse your possibilities. Because if you do the one, you will be doing the other. Don't domineer over others or demean them. Remember that God's way is mutual submission. Submit to each other in all your relationships and do so in love, rather than making demands or expectations of others. Responding to others' needs, adjusting to and accommodating one another. In all honesty, and I'm going to draw on an image I used last week as well, mutual submission is like learning to live in the upside down. And if you don't know what that image is, just picture it. It'll get you close enough. You see, what has happened here is that the leadership pyramid has been turned on its head, flipped over onto its head. And so it's not everybody serving the leader, but it's the leader serving others. What's the example for us? Mark chapter 10, verse 45, Yeshua said, I did not come to be served. I came to serve others. And this principle or this kind of behavior then is a true test. It's a significant sign of a spirit-filled life. It's a real indicator not only of a godly relationship or godly relationships, but it's also an indicator of our relationship with God. And you can bet that people looking at us will know the source of what's going on. Well, that's more than enough. Our turn. Decisions to be made. Principles to follow if we choose to follow them as we live among one another and as we interact with those around us. Take the next minute or so for timely quiet reflection and response this evening. We've talked somewhat about living in the upside down. Elena reminds us as we rise, face Jerusalem again, turning to pages 102 to 107. We are reminded not of the upside down, but when things will be turned right side up, when the world, in fact, will be perfected under the rule of the Lord Almighty. It's the Elena. It's pages 102 to 107. We face Jerusalem yet again, where the activity will center, or will start from, and will, in fact, center at that time, the time of the kingdom of David's greater son. Pages 102 to 107.
Alinu לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה יוצר בראשית, שלא שמנו פגעי הרצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם כפינו כהם, לגורלנו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא, שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוצר הארץ, ומושב יקרו בשמיים ממעל, ושכינתו זו לגבי מרומים. הוא אלוהינו, אין מלכנו, איפה סולתו, כתוב בתורתו, ויתת היום, והשתה אותה, אל לבבך, כי אדוני הוא האלוהים בשמיים ממעל, ועל הארץ מתחת עינו. It is incumbent upon us to praise the Master of all, to exalt the Creator of the world, for He has made us distinct from the nations, unique among the families of the earth. Our destiny is not like theirs, our calling is our task. We bow down and acknowledge before the King of Kings that there is none like Him, for He stretched forth the heavens like a tent and established the earth. Truly there is none like our Lord and King. As the Torah says, you shall know this day and reflect in your heart that it is the Lord who is God in the heavens above, and on the earth beneath there is none else. We hope, O Lord our God, to soon behold your majestic glory, when all abominations shall be removed, and all false gods shall be at an end.
Then shall the world be perfected under the rule of the Lord Almighty, and all mankind shall call upon your name. For to you every knee must bow, and every tongue declare that you are God. Reign over us soon and forever. May the kingdom of David's greater Son be established forever. For then shall the words be fulfilled. The Lord shall be king forever, and the Lord shall be king over all the earth. And on that day the Lord shall be one, and his name one. V'ne'amar v'haya Adonai le'melech al kol haaretz bayom hahu yeh Adonai echad u'shemo
You may be seated. Except for the man who stands alone, or will in just a moment.